So now we're going to explore whether we can create happiness, a sense of well-being for ourselves. Is happiness the responsibility of each and every one of us? And is happiness up to me? First, let's take a look at the source of happiness. Where does happiness come from? Diener.
Abraham Lincoln said that we're about as happy as we decide to be. And I think that captures a truth that we do control quite a bit of our happiness. Some people say to me, isn't it genetic? And I say, sure, there's a genetic component to happiness. But think about your hair color. It's genetic too. I mean, you inherited black, brown, blonde hair, and yet it's totally controllable. You can control it even though it is genetic. And I think happiness is the same way. Even though there's a genetic influence, our decisions, our mental habits, and so forth have a huge effect.
Helen Fisher, you don't study happiness per se, but love, which, as I'm sure we all know, not always happy. But what, in your opinion, is the source of happiness?
Well, first of all, when when you take a look at other mammals, you can really see signs of happiness in all kinds of other mammals and even birds. And humans have the same basic facial expression for happiness everywhere in the world. And there's every reason, and we now know that from brain studies of people who've destroyed brain regions so that their analytical processes aren't really linked with their emotional processes, don't have that emotional chiming in to color their decision-making processes so that they can actually make decisions. So happiness and sadness and disgust and all kinds of the basic emotions evolved millions of years ago to enable us to survive.
Carl, Honoré, do we need to slow down to find the source of happiness?
I think that we do, yeah. I mean, I've just, that's my basic thesis, I'm guessing, yeah, which I could easily retread in a very fast version if you want. But I want to come at it from a slightly different angle, which is this. There's that old quote, I think it's from John Lennon, isn't it, that life is what happens to you when you're making other plans. And I sort of think that we might want to turn that around and use it in this conference in a different way and think of that happiness is what happens to you when you're making the right plans. And what worries me about almost the cult of happiness, or putting happiness on as an endpoint up on a pedestal, is that and I think Michael alluded to this, the cartoonist before, is that it becomes too big for itself, and we end up focusing on trying to get to the end rather than focusing on the journey. And I think it's about the journey, and I think slowing down, there are lots of different ways about slowing down, but I think one of them is to use the metaphor of the journey mattering more than the destination. So I think if we focus on all the other good things, such as living a good life, being better people, living better lives in a better world, I think that the byproduct, this phrase I used in my talk, the natural byproduct of that is happiness, rather than putting happiness as a thing that we're all charging towards and straining every sinew of our body and investing every spare dollar to get to. I think that actually will backfire. So I sort of feel it works that way.
Jerril, Rechter, where does happiness come from?
I think a little bit of our context at Vic Health is very much around our agenda to create a Victoria where all Victorians can enjoy a healthy life. And for Vic Health, happiness is so much about being healthy, and our view is very much that health isn't just being free from disease or illness. Health is about being physically, mentally, and having social well-being as well. So our view is very much that in order to be happy, it's not just an individual that should be happy, we need a bigger picture society to be happy as well. So that's part of our core business, which is a pretty good job to have, I must say. We all want to live happy and fulfilling lives, and we also want our loved ones to be happy and fulfilled as well. So it does matter to all of us. In a society, we want to make sure we've got political freedom, we want to make sure that we're strongly socially connected. And as individuals, again, we want to be healthy, but also we want to have a family, we want to have an income that we can rely on. And those are the things that we know from the evidence that we gather matters to us.
All right, so I wonder where does happiness come from? Does it rely on external factors like relationships, work? To what extent do we need to look externally? Ed?
I mean, I do think that happiness is partly within us and our attitudes, what I call the top-down view of happiness, but also, of course, there's huge effects from our neighborhood, the nation we live in. Is it a corrupt nation, a war-torn nation, or is it at peace, and so forth? And also closer to home, our social relationships. So we always say having social support is one of the primary predictors of happiness. The thing I want to emphasize here is having social support, we always think, oh yeah, there's people around who will take care of me and help me and all that. No, social support is also I'm helping people. And we find that one of the strong predictors, for example, of health is actually the person is somebody everybody else counts on and who takes care of other people. So social support in both directions, I'm a supporter.
And we're not looking at genetics, are we? It's not helpful necessarily to look at genetics?
I mean, genetics has an effect. Certainly it has an effect, and there's individual differences. But we'll go beyond genetics and say, all around the world, we find that having trusting and respectful social relationships predicts happiness. And we've studied 1 million people in 160 countries, and it's everywhere. There are some universals. Sure, there's some differences between individuals and some differences between cultures, but there's universals, and social respect and trust are one of them.
Jerril, Rechter, to what extent do we look outside for happiness and find it outside?
Well, just building upon what Ed said, a sense of community absolutely matters. And there's clear evidence that shows that someone who has good social relationships is well connected compared to somebody that doesn't have those, that their mortality rate is 50% less likely to live longer. So a sense of community absolutely matters. And if you think about it in the context that think about that quote in the context of smoking, it's actually comparable to quitting smoking. So you have a better chance of living a healthier, happier life if you have strong connections. Probably if you don't smoke, it'd be a good thing as well, just on the side. But we do know that older people who are less socially connected, they have poorer health. And then take that also to the other end of the spectrum for young people. Young people that don't have strong community relationships and don't have strong personal relationships can suffer from anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. So being friendly with your neighbour and also being friendly with your peers can actually help you live longer.
And Helen, connection with others and our relationships, it's very much a part of your work. How important is it for
It's absolutely essential. I mean, I study not only people who are happily in love, but people who've been rejected in love. And when you're rejected in love, I was once at a neuroscience conference, and I was talking about the amount of crimes of passion around the world, and I was talking with a man who said, Helen, it's entirely possible that more people die of crimes of passion than die of cancer. And, I have no proof of that, but the bottom line is that very primary relationship, when it ends and you have been rejected in love, and by the way, nobody gets out of love alive. We all get rejected at some point in our lives. And, this is a sort of a disease that we all get, and we all tend to live through. But the bottom line is when you have been rejected in love, the amount of trauma is so much greater than the trauma that if you lose a job, or it's probably up there as the same as if you lose a child, because you're losing your reproductive partner, your parenting partner, your grandparenting partner. You're losing the primary a relationship that evolved over 4 million years ago. The brain is built to love, and when you have been rejected in love, you suffer horribly.
And what about work? How important is that?
I don't study that, but it is my certain guess that, I don't know, I'm not a Freudian or anything, but Freud once said, it's the two important things in life are work and love.
Yeah.
And very definitely for at least 4 million years, men and women, I think we evolved pair bonding over 4 million years ago. I didn't have time to talk about the whole evolution of pair bonding, the evolution of love, but I think that if I had to say what men's primary drive is it's to be needed. It's to provide. And when men don't have that opportunity, and women also these days also to provide, of course, and have for millions of years, and when you can't provide, and when you're not doing something that is genuinely, deeply, profoundly important to you, you're going to suffer.
A Carl, Honoré, what goes on in our working lives that contributes to happiness?
Well, I think if people feel that they are, certainly the studies suggest that when people feel they're in control of their time and that their work has meaning and purpose, and if they have strong relationships at work, that they enjoy their work and the work makes them happy. And all of those things, I would argue, I suppose, looking through the lens of slow requires some kind of slowing down, which is not what you find in a lot of workplaces. But I just wanted to kind of pick up this idea of community that has been floating around the panel, because it seems to me there are sort of three levels here. One is that we can be stuck in the individual kind of atomized state where we have no good relationships, which obviously I think we all agree is lamentable. The next step up is to have good, strong relationships with friends and family and so on, and that's immensely enriching and makes us healthy and happy. But there's that other jump up, which is the one to community. And I feel that each of those stages requires more slowness, if you like. And I think it's not enough for us just to carry on. You know, let's assume we're in a kind of fast-forward lifestyle. We slow it down a bit, we build some good friendships, we have a really good partner, but we don't connect beyond that. We don't connect to there's an old African proverb, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that we're at that stage now where we need to get back that sense of something bigger, the old idea of it takes a village. You know, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to make people happy. It's not enough, I think, just to have the good romantic relationship. Of course, these are hugely important building blocks. And I think one of the key aims of slowing down is for us to widen out, to go to that third level where community becomes a part of everyday life and something that we all aspire to and all have.
So we have heard from you that the pace of life is really essential to get the right pace of life. Jerril, Rechter, how challenging is it to slow down in this digital age?
Oh, it's incredibly challenging, and building upon what was just said then, that we live in a digitally connected world. There's no two ways about it. And we've never been closer but far apart at the same time. We did a really interesting survey over the last couple of years, a whole of population survey across Victoria, where some of the questions that we looked at were around work and time and life. And the things that Victorians are telling us is that they don't have enough time for being with their family, they don't get enough sleep, the pressures of work are too demanding. And that absolutely is so much around the way that we are working these days. The 24/7 way of being digitally connected in the world is a fantastic thing on some respects, but again, if you look to the other extreme of it, when you know that children and younger people are constantly dealing with the 24/7 nature of cyberbullying, and the anxiety, the depression, the feeling and sense of loneliness that happens as a result of that need to be connected, but also at the same time, it's pushing you further and further into isolation, is an incredibly difficult situation that we find ourselves. And I guess that we know that strong social connections and a strong sense of community at that time will actually really help you in those times of stress.
So, Ed, Diener, across the world, what have you observed? What's the relationship between the stress that perhaps comes from the digital age and the relationship between stress and the pace of living?
We actually see that in the richest countries, they have the highest life satisfaction, and they also have the highest level of stress. Very interesting, right? Yes, they're satisfied with their life's good, but they're stressed out. And just to reiterate what Carl's saying, young people seem worse at this rushing. Our kids rush their kids every minute of every day, as Carl's saying. And we try to get them to slow down, and the grandkids come and visit us in order to get a break and slow down. So we see it, and I think it's all over the world. We see it all, 160 countries around the globe. We see that same pattern. It's happening, and as a country becomes more and more wealthy, they get into the rushing syndrome. Yeah.
Helen Fisher, you've analysed the effect of women moving back into the workforce. How does that relate to, I guess, the pace of living for both men and women, and how they juggle that?
Well, you know, it's probably not so much that, I mean, there's no question about that women are piling back into the job market, and in that respect, we're actually moving forward to the kinds of relationships we had a million years ago. But there's a huge difference, and that is, there was a wonderful anthropology book called The Original Affluent Society, and they were looking at hunting and gathering societies. And in these original affluent societies, in which the brain was built, in which our drive for social relations and community began, men and women worked only about 15 hours a week. They spent a great deal of time just talking around the campfire. They had all kinds of rituals and dances almost every other week, time off from the work, a tremendous amount of sharing, and the pace was very much slower. And that's the world in which we evolved. And what's so interesting, there was a piece in the New York Times this week about a guy who works for Google. And he was saying it, now what he has to do is he just leaves his BlackBerry or his iPhone, whatever it is, at work on Friday and spends the whole weekend without it. And I think probably with this whole world of modern, not only women piling into the job market and needing to keep up, but the whole world of modern technology, we are going to come to realize what you're saying, that slow is better. What's different between now and in the past is in the past it was naturally slow. These days we have to create slow. You have to find your grandfather. You got to build your community. You got to leave the BlackBerry at work. You have to do it for yourself. Perhaps that's another form of happiness, simply just learning to find slow.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just quickly take a look at perhaps a couple of ingredients which may make a good and fulfilling life. Altruism and compassion have been mentioned. Ed Diener, what are the secret ingredients? Would you say that they're included?
So, you know, Carl said something interesting. He said, you want to be happy, don't rush toward happiness. And I think one of the problems is if you just think of happiness as your goal, then you may want to take drugs, you can drink, you can have a lot of quick sex, you can do things. And most of those things work in the short run, but in the long run, they're self-defeating. So we talk about sustainable happiness. What are the things that cause happiness in the long run? And I think the social things, the altruism and compassion, are one of the key ingredients. A second one is mastery, learning skills, developing your skills, and using your skills. So I talk about the fact that I used to think, oh, I want to make money and win awards and be a famous psychologist. And then I got a lot of those things, and I found out they make you happy for a day and then it goes away. And then all of a sudden I figured out what really makes me happy is doing research and giving talks and the process of using my skills and mastery. So I think for sustainable happiness, the compassion and the altruism and the social skills, having meaning and purpose in life and important goals to you, and mastery in using your skills.
Helen Fisher, altruism, compassion?
It's interesting, there's different kinds of altruism. There's something called heroic altruism, which is dashing into a burning building to save somebody that you don't know. And that seems to be linked with the testosterone system in both men and women. The kind of, the nurturing of your children and everything seems to be linked with the estrogen system in both men and women. And I just think that there's probably a lot of different forms of compassion, a lot of different forms of altruism. And that, I like what's been said about the community. We are a group animal. We evolved in groups. And, Darwin never knew. Why did altruism evolve? If I'm nice to that guy over there and but we've now discovered some of the genetics of if I help you, there's reciprocal altruism. You will help me. And perhaps we're sisters. And so not only by helping you, I help your DNA and I share some of your DNA. So biologists have worked quite a long time on how could altruism have evolved genetically. And indeed, we've found that it can, that there's math behind it, and we've got millions of years of needing to live together in a group in order to survive. I think we are natural altruists. But just as Ed said, there's going to be some people who are more altruistic of certain types than others. And I think we need a lot of different forms of altruism to have the group survive.
Mm-hmm. Jerril, Rechter, there's a study that's been done on bystanders taking action against racism, which might illustrate something of this.
Yeah, I think it illustrates it perfectly that There are ways of giving back. You can volunteer, you can be connected to other people, et cetera, but we've just recently released a really fantastic piece of research that showed that over 80% of Australians believe that not enough was being done to combat race-based discrimination. And over 85% of those people thought that, workplaces and sporting clubs had a leading role to play in stamping out race-based discrimination. But what we also found was there was about a third of the people that were surveyed that whilst they might have witnessed a racist incident, and that could be a joke or a sledge, they would have felt uncomfortable about that particular action but not been ready to stand up and actually do something about it. So what we believe is that group of people are the group of people that can actually make a huge difference by giving back, by standing up and saying to somebody, look, that's just not on, what you've just said then. We don't agree with that. Or going and speaking to the victim, who may be the person that the joke is about, and saying, we don't agree with what that person just said. So there are ways of giving back, and there are ways of having altruism that aren't just about volunteering or being connected in your community. You can actually be somebody that, I guess, listens to what's happening around you. And to pick up upon what Carl said, if you're building that sense of community, being aware of the community around you and the things that are happening and taking action, and in this particular instance, being a bystander and saying, we don't agree with that racist joke or that racist comment, and doing something about it. It makes you feel good, absolutely, makes you feel happy. It also makes the other person feel happy, and that's incredibly important as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in the remaining minutes, this is the hard bit, some take-home messages. How can we increase our overall well-being and happiness? Carl, start with you.
Well, I suppose the short answer is to slow down, right? But what are the levers you can pull? A few quick tips for slowing down, if you like. I just suggest to people that you breathe every once in a while. Just if you find yourself in that kind of frantic, frenetic, everything's moving too, just take a few deep breaths and you get an automatic, stabilizing the blood pressure and a kind of quick fix of slow, if you like. Another suggestion I make to people is what I think of as the speed audit, where you're going through your day. Every once in a while, just stop and ask yourself, am I going at the right speed? Because so often we just go fast from habit, from default, without even thinking about it. And often it's enough just to stop and pause and say, what's my speedometer telling me here? And if you find yourself going too fast, to go more slowly. With the gadgets, just that idea of leaving it in the office or being more disciplined, switching it off. And also I think we need to look at our schedules and do less. We're all chronically trying to do way too much. We want to have it all, to use the expression that you hear bandied around in the women's magazines, but having it all is just a recipe for hurrying it all. So I think it's important to sit down in the cold light of day at all the things you're trying to cram into an average week or month, put it in an order of priority and start cutting at the bottom. You'd be surprised how easy it is to let things go. And just remember also in the long run that nobody lies on their deathbed and looks back and thinks, I wish I'd spent more time watching TV or online or shopping or in the office. See the big picture, because when you look at how people are using their time, you mentioned, Jerril, that Australians feel they haven't got enough time. Last time I looked, they were watching 4 hours of TV a day, a couple more of that online. So it's often stopping, slowing down, and just looking hard at how we're using our time. That could be the first lever to pull.
Okay. Jerril, your quick take-home message.
Quick take-home message, I think there are two great examples. One is close to home, City of Port Phillip have a fantastic initiative called Smiles Per Hour, where they're actually measuring people smiling at each other in the street. So wouldn't that just be a great thing to do? So at lunchtime today, just lift your eyes up and smile at everybody. I think that'd be a fantastic thing. Probably something closer to my heart is getting involved in the arts. We know from evidence that there's really strong connectors via the arts, that you can build fantastic relationships, you can express yourself as well. So if there's an opportunity for you to participate in the arts, I'd absolutely suggest that.
Okay. Ed Diener.
I want to say, be more positive to others actively. So express your gratitude to them. You probably feel it. Express it more often. Express compliments to other people. I'm going to do that right now. You guys all gave great talks today. I love them. And it's very hard for me. I don't have the rushing problem. I'm one of the few people that doesn't have a mobile phone. I don't have all these devices. I don't have the rushing problem. I really focus. But this is an area where I can do it because I was the strong silent type. And I've learned to say positive things to other people, but I have to keep working on it and saying compliments and interesting things and gratitude and so forth to other people. And that makes them happier, and it also makes you happier.
And Helen Fisher, the final word.
I mean, there is data now that when you give compliments to other people, it actually lowers cholesterol in you, lowers blood pressure in you, boosts the immune system in you. So it's giving to others, but it's also giving to yourself. But if I had to sum it up in 4 words, marry the right person.
Easier said than done. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much. Dr. Helen Fisher, Professor Ed Diener, Jerril Rechter, and Carl Honoré, thank you so much. Join me in welcoming them.